So today we're going to talk about the Bronze Age in the Aegean, and we're going to focus primarily on Minoan and Mycenean society. This is the kind of the core foundation of the classical Greek world in the Iron Age, and we're not really going to talk too much about Greek society and or Roman society for that matter. And I've said it before, it's because you get that history in other classes. So I want to focus on today on the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, and the Bronze Age build up into classical Greece. So if we kind of look at the timeline here, we're looking at transition from the Neolithic societies into the Bronze Age. And that begins sometime around 3600 BCE on the island of Crete and about 3100 BCE on the Greek mainland itself. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is even though we're talking about the Minoans and the Mycenaeans as separate civilizations, there are strong similarities in social organization, architectural style, and artistic expression throughout all of the Bronze Age cultures of the Aegean. So, Minoan and Mycenaean societies are intricately linked, and that is likely because of the strong trade connections. Right, so if we kind of think about this, we've already talked about the importance of trade from Greek society, the establishment of Greek colonies elsewhere, like at Messina, for Iron Age societies in the Central and Western Europe. So those same trade connections are important here. So we have the groups here in Greece who are primarily trading wine and olive oil for goods from outside. And those connections then provide the impetus for the expansion of the Minoan and Mycenaean societies. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that there are really three kind of broad civilizations here, but we're going to overlook the Cycladic Greek civilizations here on the islands. So you have Minoan civilization here centered on the island of Crete, and its height is in the Middle Minoan period, around 2100 to 1600 BCE. And during that time, they're able to consolidate control of all the island of Crete, and they start expanding northward. And so we see Minoan style resources and pottery and art and architecture being built on islands in the Cyclades like Thera, and then on the southern shores of the Peloponnesus and the Helladic Peninsula. So we can see this kind of influence of Minoan society. After the collapse of the Minoans, the Middle Minoans in around 1600, and we'll talk about why it collapsed a little bit later, we see the rise of the Mycenean civilization. The center of that Aegean network moves to the Peloponnese and the Helladic Peninsula. So you can kind of look here at the core area that would form the core of ancient Greece, is the height of Mycenean society. And they begin to expand outward again into the Cyclades. And by about 1400 BCE, we can start to see Mycenean influence built on top of the ruins of Middle Minoan society. So they kind of expand their hegemony to control Crete. And what's fueling all of this is the trade with Anatolia. First the Phrygians, then the Lydians, and then later the Hittites. Mesopotamia, right? The Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Phoenicians, right? And the Egyptians, right? So all of this is kind of, you can think about Crete and the Aegean as this kind of core area of its own that's trading wine and olive oil in particular, highly prized goods, with these groups of people. Right? And so we can still see that today in the Mediterranean. In the Eastern Mediterranean, this focus on wine and olive oil as intricate trade goods. And I want to start with the Minoans because this is where we really start to see the expansion of the first state-level administrative systems in the Aegean. And so what we can kind of see is here consolidation of the island of Crete itself. And Crete is really kind of fascinating for two reasons. It's full of extremely fertile volcanic soils. So it grows grapes, wheat, barley, and olives incredibly well. And that gives Crete kind of an advantage here in the Aegean. So you have really rich agricultural plains surrounded by stark high mountain passes, and that gives good pasture land as well for domesticated animals, in particular goats, sheep, and cattle. So we can see that around 2100 BCE, the expansion northward into the Cycladic Islands and into southern Greece. And really, we can kind of think about Crete as a trade hub, right? Remember, all these ships are sailing the eastern Mediterranean. And as they're kind of moving from Greece to Turkey to Cyprus, right, to modern Lebanon and Israel, if they're moving points north, south, east, west, Crete's right there in the middle of the Mediterranean, and it becomes this kind of central sailing hub. We can think of Crete almost like Atlanta for Delta Airlines. All of those flights move and are routed through Atlanta, where they then go elsewhere. Crete becomes that kind of center. So the multiple ports on Crete, north, south, east, and west, provide those ports of call for trading all across the eastern Mediterranean. And that brought a lot of wealth. And that wealth is then constructed into central administrative palaces that we'll talk about later at sites like Knossos and Phaistos. But we also see an intricate network of large country villas, and it's still debated whether or not the elites are living there year round, or if it's an escape for the elites of these palace towns. But either way, these country villas controlled agricultural production zones, almost kind of like modern plantations. And then we also have the small agricultural communities. But the important part about this in Middle Minoan is that every community had central plazas and warehouses, and are built on kind of a uniform plan, which kind of suggests state distribution of goods and large-scale public gatherings. And we'll talk about the importance of those public gatherings later. So what we can see is, by the emergence of the Middle Minoan period, is a highly centralized economy built on agricultural extraction and redistribution.